started to realize that my autonomy ultimately called the shots. I didn't have control over my life. Ultimately, they did.
It's more inspiring actually to hear about the difficulties and to be able to resonate with you as just a normal person that went off to start their own business, and now you've gone on to do obviously over £5 million.
The weight of the loss and the memories of that conversation were overwhelming, and I just had to take a step outside at one point, and I just went out and sat in my car outside, and I thought back to my nan's encouragement, and I don't know, I felt this surge of determination.
Despite the fact that it would have been, I'm sure, terrifying to leave such a stable job.
And since that day, I've never looked back, and I've been able to go and do whatever we want, whenever we want, without answering to anyone.
That's given you the freedom, that's given you the control back over your time, and surely you could just continue building and growing a dropshipping business and not have to open up Dropship Unlocked.
So I was like, okay, I've got to do this. And I remember driving into the office and just looking down at the envelope on the seat next to me and just thinking, like, my life's about to change. Is this a mistake? I don't know. And like... Welcome to the Dropship Unlocked podcast. I'm Lewis Smith, the founder of Dropship Unlocked, and with me is our client success coach, James Eardley. Now, when we're not recording the podcast episodes, we're running our own e-commerce businesses and helping aspiring entrepreneurs launch their own high-ticket dropshipping businesses. Keen to build your own 6 or even 7-figure business? My book, The Home Turf Advantage, is your blueprint for launching a profitable online store. Grab your copy at htabook.com today and let's get you started. Now sit back, relax, and let's unlock your potential with the Dropship Unlocked podcast.
Today, we're going to be diving into the personal journey of Lewis Smith. That's right, our very own Lewis, my co-host of the podcast and the founder of Dropship Unlocked. We'll be exploring how you, Lewis, got into running online businesses and why you went on to start Dropship Unlocked. Lewis, I want to ask you all about your journey so far to inspire people to take control of their own entrepreneurial path. So, Lewis, do you feel ready to share your journey today?
Thanks, James. Yep, excited to share my experiences and the reason behind starting Dropship Unlocked. Hopefully this one will resonate with many of our listeners as well who are looking for their own breakthroughs in e-commerce.
Fantastic. Well, let's start with the foundations. No better place to start than finding out really what was the foundations for your working life, which would have been your upbringing. So how do you think your upbringing impacted your initial life decisions?
Yeah, I think growing up, I had a really happy childhood. My upbringing, I was very fortunate. I was the eldest of three children in total. So I've got a younger brother and a younger sister. And yeah, growing up, my parents had a really strong work ethic, a real strong focus on financial security. And I presume that came probably, as it often does, from their own childhoods where maybe their families didn't have that much money and therefore they had a very humble upbringing. And so they really wanted to kind of turn that around and focus on making sure we had financial stability and security as a family. So I think that work ethic was instilled into me from a very young age. My dad was an estate agent in London, started off working for another estate agency, eventually handed in his notice, much like I did later on in my journey, and then went on to set up an estate agency and grew it to multiple offices all around London and built a big chain and eventually sold it down the line. And my mum was a flight attendant as well. So, they were very physically tied to their jobs. There was no working on Zoom or working online for them. Obviously, the internet didn't even exist back then, really, and they just couldn't have worked remotely. It was that they had to be there in person. For my mum, it was days on end. She'd do a Sydney trip for 4 days, and then she'd be in New York twice a week, and then she'd be back to that. So she was constantly on the move and traveling. And then dad, like, many people did back then, and even still now, would work in London until 7, 8 in the evening. And sometimes he'd not get home until I'd gone to bed. And so I remember some of my most joyful childhood memories actually involve spending time with my parents because it was a luxury. It was like they would work hard in the week. We'd be at nursery or then eventually school. But then when my dad would take us to football training on a Sunday morning, I remember that being a really special time, and he'd get roped into like refereeing the games, or they'd ask him to run the touchline, and he used to get frustrated with that standing there in the rain. But then we'd kind of have a chat in the car. I was always like covered from head to toe in mud, after all the slide tackles in football. and he just asked me how I felt the game went and give me some like tactical advice. And I just remember like really latching onto that and just idolizing my dad and his role that he played in my upbringing. And then also with my mum, some of the great times and memories with her are like her job enabled her to have staff travel as a benefit. So we used to be able to travel around the world to some like incredible destinations all over the planet, and often in the business class as well, which was amazing. And it was such a fortunate thing that I had only until I was 21 years of age. And then you lose that as a family, as a child of staff, or that was the rule back then anyway. And so I was very lucky. And it really, I think what it did, that ability to travel the world so early, obviously back then I didn't fully appreciate it, but I think it just broadened my horizons. You know, it showed me what was outside of my town and my country. And it showed me like the different cultures around the world of how people live. And I think those experiences just taught me the value of hard work, the importance of financial stability, and highlighted the sacrifices as well that my parents needed to make to achieve it as well. So yeah, initially that kind of set me on the path of going through school, going through university. I had a great biology teacher at school, Mr. Morgan, who inspired me in the subject of biology. And sometimes you'll have experienced this, if there's a teacher that you specifically remember just really like lighting up a subject for you at school. And for me, it was him. And that encouraged me to say, okay, well, I'm not sure what I want to do for a living, but I really like this subject. So I'm going to go and study something related to human biology. And I went on to study medical microbiology at university, which was a completely kind of random shift from where I thought I might end up. But did that and then went into the corporate world, followed that route, went on to a medical devices and diagnostics graduate training scheme, lived around the UK, worked for a huge American corporate and worked in that company for probably 8.5, 9 years, something like that. And yeah, various different roles, being in operating theatres, helping with medical devices, helping with like training doctors and nurses in procedures for using the specific devices that we had. So yeah, it was a really interesting journey, but it's not the traditional corporate path of being like a cubicle where you're speaking to your co-workers either side of you. A little bit different, but still came with its drawbacks, which we'll dive into, I'm sure, in this episode.
Absolutely. No, fascinating upbringing. No doubt your dad's work ethic showed you the value of hard work and what you can do to provide when you go out on your own as well. And also, no doubt from your mum, you saw the other side of the world, and you even saw business class. I think to see that at a formative age, I guess you started to realize the impact of financial stability. There's really a bit of a key theme that was built for you. And so that went on to build the career that you've got now. But of course, it sounds like the start of your career has got nothing to do with the current situation that you're in at the moment. So I'm interested to dive into that. Why do you think you went into the corporate world and then you were seeking something different? Why did you look for an escape from that initial corporate life?
Yeah, well, you're right on that first point about being able to travel in such style as well. It was funny. Sometimes it was business class. Other times it was jump seats. So like I've had trips where I've traveled to Rio in Brazil or to Thailand on a fold down jump seat with the 4-point harness or the 3-point harness that you wear on one of those staff jump seats. And that is incredibly uncomfortable. And you're sitting there like basically in a coat cupboard with no window for like 12 hours or something ridiculous. So it's funny, it can go one way where you're like, oh wow, flat bed and a movie and a really nice meal, to like sitting in a coat cupboard for 12 hours. So it's a real kind of contrast. But you know, when you're young, you don't care, do you? It's exciting either way you're traveling. But you're so right, like seeing the people who were in business class paying for that fare it changed my perspective on money, and it made me think I could do this one day. Like what do these people do for a living? I wonder what businesses they own. What do they do? And it kind of, that proximity to wealth, I think, really expanded my belief in what would be possible one day. So this is probably happening on a subliminal level the whole time, but I do think it really expands your horizon. So yeah, to answer your question, what was it about the corporate world that made me want to seek something different? I think the big thing that I've learned about myself in recent years is my desire for more freedom and autonomy. So one of my huge values is desire for autonomy. I want to be able to control and have spontaneity and have freedom over my time, both in terms of where I spend my time, what I do, where I travel to. I hate the thought of someone being able to dictate to me where I have to be and when. I don't know what it is, but something about that just grates against every fiber in my being, and I rebel against it. And it's probably just the deep-rooted entrepreneurial spirit in me from my parents and my upbringing. But I remember a really pivotal moment when a colleague I was with, we walked into this hotel for a meeting. We used to kind of meet up in central London sometimes to discuss different projects we were working on. We walked into this hotel and we saw all of this group of like entrepreneurs sitting there drinking nice coffees and like looking really cool and relaxed, working on their MacBooks. And we kind of looked at them and we were in our like corporate attire. They were all in their casuals. And she turned to me and she said, I'd always seen you as someone in that world, that kind of startup world. Have you ever considered that? And I just remember that it really stuck with me. And I thought, no, I hadn't ever seen myself in that world. But then, you know, when something just rings through your head for hours and days afterwards, and I was like, entrepreneur, startup. I was quite entrepreneurial at school. I wonder why I hadn't considered that. Maybe I'd thrive as an entrepreneur. And I went home that evening and I searched on Audible for entrepreneurship. And I found Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek book. And that was really interesting and opened up my eyes because it was what he talks about in that book. It's funny, it's a bit of a clickbait title for the book because it's not so much about squeezing a traditional work week into 4 hours. It's about creating a life and a business that works passively from your own time so that you only have to put in 4 hours, if that, of work per week to maintain it. You've built a system, right? But obviously, it's a cool title that catches people's attention like it did to me. And it was interesting. The concepts of that book are so in contrast to what was happening in my career at that point. So I was getting demands of my time from my boss and from co-workers in the corporate world who were well-meaning. You know, they weren't like doing this maliciously, but it was like I'd get an email through in the evening saying, oh, we need you in Leeds tomorrow morning. And I'd be like, okay, right, that's the whatever 5:30, 6 a.m. train. I've got to get into central London, you know, to get that train up. And then they'd say, we need you in Scotland for 3 days for this conference. Okay, right, gonna fly up, spend time away. And then they'd be like, right, we need you in hospital in central London tomorrow at 9 a.m. and you've got to be there until 6 p.m. I'm like, okay, so that's like rush hour into some area of London. And, you know, it just started, I started to realize that my autonomy had been taken away from me. And it was gradually happening without me realizing. It kind of creeps day by day. And I just felt it slipping away. And the pay, the salary, the commission, the benefits were great, but that didn't really matter because it was the fact that I didn't ultimately call the shots. I didn't have control over my life. Ultimately, they did. And yeah, it didn't sit well with me. And I wasn't sure at the time quite how to articulate it. But I remember saying to my fiance at the time, Becky, now my wife, about this 4-Hour Workweek book by a guy called Tim Ferriss, and I've just listened to it and it's amazing. There's this thing called digital nomads and they live anywhere and they have a thing called a muse, which is like a side business, and you know, they earn their money online. And you can imagine, like, when you're hearing this information secondhand, like Becky was, it doesn't quite hit home as much as it does when you're hearing it directly from the horse's mouth. So I remember one day I was sitting in my apartment in London on the edge of the sofa. I remember it vividly in the kitchen. And Becky was sitting at the breakfast bar and I'd been talking about this concept to her for the last few days. And to my surprise, she just said, okay, well, what if we move our wedding earlier in the year so that, you know, the grandparents, who many of whom were kind of ill at the time and were, you know, not that well. So we were like, well, let's bring it earlier so that as many people can attend as possible. And then after that, we could move to Thailand and quit our jobs and take the leap. And I was like, I don't know what to say because I didn't expect her to actually say it and call my bluff on it. I'd talked about this as a pipe dream, but then she actually said it. And I was like, okay, well, maybe that's the push I needed to actually make this happen. And so that was a really interesting turning point for me. The idea of being able to balance work and family life, which was a core value of mine, having that family first mentality, even though back then I didn't even have children of my own. I just had a very strong vision of myself as a dad in the future. When I would talk and think about my future life, I'd say I'm going to be a good father for my children and I'm going to show them what's possible in life. And so when the opportunity arose, I thought, I'm going for it. I'm going to do this. And I realized that at that point, the traditional corporate route just wasn't aligning with that. The path I was on, I wasn't aligning with it anymore. And so although back then I was at a very different point in my life, I wanted one day, when I did have children, which I do today, I wanted back then to be able to show my children that they could control their own destiny, that they could control their time, and that they didn't need to submit to this default system in society that just controls and sucks up their time and eats up their autonomy all the way through life until retirement, just because that's what people do, you know, that kind of cliche. The freedom to be able to work from anywhere and spend more time with the people that matter most for me, my family, that for me became the new definition of success. Even if I was going to earn less money, I was happy with going down that route.
Yeah, well, you knew what your values were and you pushed for those, despite the fact that it would have been, I'm sure, terrifying to leave such a stable job with a good income, and you'd set yourself onto that path of a good life, but you realised that it wasn't going to be aligned with your values, no matter what the pay was or the benefits and the security that came. Your values were clearly around freedom, control, autonomy, and that wasn't going to come from the traditional corporate route. So, but it still takes a huge amount of courage, no doubt. So that push from Becky, I'm sure, was huge. And suddenly, like, oh no, I've actually got to do this now. As terrifying as it is, you've got to go through what really is true to your core values. So there's definitely some bravery involved with that decision. So from that position, you realize that there's this new world that's been exposed to you by the 4-hour work week. There is a different way of living than the default traditional corporate path, but you know that you've still got to earn money while you're traveling. So you've seen that idea of Muse in the 4-hour work week. How did you actually start exploring the different business models that were available for you to be able to travel and earn at the same time? Can you tell us a little bit about your early experiences with those business ventures?
Yeah, I mean, in the book, he doesn't necessarily explain how to do it, does he? He just talks about it as a concept and saying, oh, you can and do these muses and earn money online and sell information or sell physical products without actually holding stock. It's called dropshipping, but he doesn't say, here's how you do it. So I kind of went down the YouTube rabbit hole back then, and like it does today, it had so many distractions, so much conflicting advice and information that it just kind of forces you. It's almost like you're a deer in the headlights. You just don't know what to do. You don't know which way to turn, what information is true. And this was back in like 2017, so there's only more confusion out there today, or the conflicting advice. I know that he mentioned the model of dropshipping, and he gave examples of digital nomads running the business model. And I think at the time, in the book, even he ran a business like this himself at one point. So I searched on YouTube and I found this one channel of a guy that was kind of showing how to do this. And he was like, oh, you just set up a store. By the way, this model is horribly flawed, so don't necessarily follow this advice. But he said, set up a Shopify store. And you go to a website like AliExpress or an app like Oberlo or Temu. I don't think Temu existed back then, but it's kind of the equivalent now, isn't it? And you just set up some ads and you run ads to the products that you found for cheap. You mark them up to a higher price, and then you sell them and you ship them from China, and you don't have to touch the products. And that's dropshipping, and you watch the millions in profits start to pour in. So I was like, okay, cool. Now, anyone who's tried that route knows that's not quite how it pans out, right? So I was excited to get the site selling and up and running. And I set up this site selling men's ties, like neckties. And I was thinking, that's going to be my niche. That's where I'll start. It's a really good audience. I can target them specifically with Facebook ads. So set up the site. I was really proud of it. Set up my Facebook ads live one evening, like targeting them, showing the images, like giving a discount, whatever, and went to sleep, like fingers crossed, ready to go. And then woke up in the morning and had made a sale for £19.99, I think it was, or it might have been $19. Can't remember if he sold in dollars on there. And I actually still have the WhatsApp messages that I sent to my family. I was going through them this morning in preparation for this episode. And it's really interesting because the customer had bought the tie, but he tried to use a 15% discount code that I'd set up and advertised on the site, but I'd obviously set it up wrong. For some reason, I'd messed up the settings or something. And he left this scathing review on our Facebook business page saying that I've been scammed. They said it was a 15% discount. It didn't work. I've ordered it, but this company's a rip-off. And I was like, I woke up and there's this mixed feeling of like elation, like I've made my first sale, and then devastation, like my reputation's been tarnished and it's all come crashing down. And I managed to reply to him, and I wrote this long email. I really overthought it. I was like, if I just offer him the discount that he wanted, and maybe I can placate him. And he took the review down and, was like very grateful for the customer service. It took me half an hour to deal with this one customer. And it's funny, when you're using that model, you end up realizing that that's just the first problem you encounter, the issues with the customers that buy stuff at like £19 and their level of expectation being like way up here. What then happens is you have the problem of the long delivery times. It then takes like 2 weeks to a month for the item to get put on a ship sent from China to the customer, and it arrives in this crumpled up little package covered in plastic and like Chinese writing, and then it says on it the trade price usually that you bought the item at, so like $2.99 instead of $20. And so it's sending all of this like mixed messaging to the customer, and it's just a flawed model because the item is often not even as high quality as you saw in the photos on AliExpress. So then the item that arrives is awful quality. It took ages to get there. And that then leads to more customer complaints, and then items getting delayed at the border due to needing to pay customs duties and taxes. That's another cause for delay. And I ended up realizing that I'd made no profit on the order. I'd actually lost money after the amount that I'd spent on Facebook ads just to make that sale. So needless to say, that was a disaster, and I just shut it down fairly quickly after that. And I looked at all these other models because I thought, well, there must be another model out there that we can use to create an online income. And I looked at things like affiliate marketing, but I don't know, I found it like I didn't own the business. It was like I was just promoting other people's businesses, but I wasn't building an asset or anything stable that I could one day sell, or a secure income system. And also things like policies change, affiliate scheme policies change, Google's search ranking algorithm changes, and then suddenly your business is wiped off the face of the earth. So I just think that I wanted something I had a bit more ownership over. And I looked at things like print on demand, but I didn't want to be like churning out new designs constantly to try and stay relevant. And also so much of your margin gets eaten up by the company that's actually doing the printing. It's often pretty poor quality. Again, you're not really building an asset or a saleable business. So that was kind of ruled out for me. I looked at Amazon FBA and I did so much product research. I'd ordered samples from China. I arranged inspections at the factory in China. I was ready to go. I had our products ready, but I just couldn't justify risking thousands of pounds of my own money to order a huge quantity of stock that may never even sell. It wasn't proven to sell, and it may get rejected by Amazon. You hear these horror stories, someone spends 10 grand on stock and it arrives and Amazon just says, sorry, no, there's something wrong, there's a label missing or something, we have to reject it. And even if they accept it, as we know, Amazon takes such a huge cut of the price that it just becomes very difficult to make a profit. And so especially when you get competitors jumping into the same listing and then undercutting you. So I was getting overwhelmed by all of these different models. Nothing seemed to be working, and I was starting to lose hope. And I just thought, well, is there even a legitimate way out of the corporate life here? All these promises from people online about replacing your income, I just felt like I was running on empty. There was no clear path forward.
But I think a lot of people can resonate with that feeling, because it's nice to know, from every success story that I hear, and it's the same with yours, Lewis, is that it always is preceded by a period of learning, mistakes, difficulties, but having to pivot and having to be resilient anyway. So clearly you're resilient despite having those initial failures. So what was the actual turning point for you? Can you pinpoint a moment or a time when you came across a different type of dropshipping, and what initially attracted you to that model?
Yeah, so I realized that selling cheap products from China was probably not going to be the way to make this work. But I really liked the concept of paying a supplier once I'd already been paid for a product by a customer. It felt like such a reduction of risk on my part, not having to shell out thousands for products that may never even sell. So I took an American course on high ticket dropshipping, which was quite a popular concept in the US. And I kind of saw the potential for it to work in the UK. Couldn't really find anyone doing it in the UK successfully, but there were major adaptations that I would need to make to actually apply the model from the US into the UK. The markets are very different. The rules, the regulations, the laws are very different. And so kind of combined with that, at the time, my grandma was quite ill and she was in a hospice, and it was this end of life palliative care centre. And I used to go and see her after work. I was still working the job at this point. And I used to take my laptop in and, I'd sit there and do some emails and stuff and chat to her. And I remember I tried to just involve her as much as I could, because it was a really depressing place, as you can imagine. And I'm trying to inject energy into this environment and try and help bring excitement into her world. And I'd tell her about my plans for this new high ticket business and how I was planning to do it in the UK and use it to replace our incomes as a family, and eventually wanted to move to this place in Thailand called Chiang Mai, where lots of entrepreneurs go and meet up, and then maybe spend time in Bali. And my nan was a huge source of success and belief in me. She really supported me, and she always told me to just go for it. She'd say things like, if anyone, why not you? And so she'd always support me and push me to go for it. And her words really resonated with me during those challenging times. And I remember telling her, these were my plans. I was going to do this and it would be amazing. And unfortunately, she passed away before our wedding with Becky. And it was a really difficult period of time for me. And I remember a few days after she passed away, I was there with my family. We were clearing out her house, and we were, a sofa was being lifted past me and taken out, and, they're kind of moving everything out of the house. And the weight of the loss and the memories of that conversation were overwhelming. And I just had to take a step outside at one point. And I just went out and sat in my car outside. And I thought back to my nan's encouragement. And I don't know, I felt this surge of determination. And I just thought, right there, I'm going to make the call to a potential supplier. I'm going to call them. And I don't know why I've been building this up into such a big thing. It doesn't need to be. I'm going to do it. I could kind of hear her voice saying, like, go for it. And it was a really tense moment. I called the supplier on my phone. I remember exactly where I was, parked outside her flat, and the supplier answered. And I was like, hi, we run an e-commerce business. We'd love to sell your products. I've been looking into them. I think they'd sell really well with our market. Could we open up an account with you? Could we work with you? And the line just went quiet for a bit. And I was like, I could hear my heart pounding. And then he said, yeah, that sounds great. Just had a look at your website. It looks really good. I'll send the forms over. Could you get them signed? And we can begin supplying you. And I just realized at that moment, I'd been building this up into something it needn't have been. It really wasn't that big a deal, and went on to sign many more suppliers since then. And yeah, it was a big adaptation. That American course provided a solid foundation, but obviously adapting it to the UK market involved overcoming challenges like finding suppliers in the UK, understanding the UK specific regulations, UK specific taxes, VAT, corporation tax, the laws, the contracts, the distance selling regulations, all the different terminology. It's very different market, different regulations. And the process of adapting, it was tough, but I knew that it was essential because I didn't want to have to also adapt to the market that I was in. So I thought, well, let's just keep one thing the same. I'm in the UK. Let's just run it here. Like there's enough 66 million people here or something. I'm sure we can find some customers here. And so, yeah, it was my nan's encouragement that for me was a big driving force, especially during the tough times. And her belief in me gave me the strength to persevere. And then signing that first supplier for me was a pivotal moment, and it set the stage for future success. And of course, her passing was really hard, but it also propelled me to honor her memory and really push forward and make the business a success. So I always think about her in that moment, and that sometimes that's the nudge you need.
Yeah, it's amazing story. I mean, she had some really wise words to say to you. I'm sure now she's obviously very proud of the success that you've gone on to achieve. But sometimes we go through very, very difficult things in life, don't we? And it puts things into perspective. The fear that we've got around calling a supplier or building a business, registering a limited company, whatever it is, that fear that we've got, sometimes we go through difficult things and it puts things into perspective about what really matters. And just going for it, in her words, is really, really powerful to know that, we get one chance and we can really make the most of it. Or we can, just accept for mediocrity and the life that's more by default. So you've gone out on this journey and you've been inspired by that moment. But of course, there's going to be loads of hurdles, no doubt, along the way. So you still have to practice that resilience while you're building this incredible new life for yourself. So what challenges, can you remember a few that you faced while you were building up the new dropshipping business?
Yeah, I think the majority of challenges that I can remember actually came from the flawed model, the model from China. So obviously you've got the long delivery times, you've got poor quality control. It's, you're really building your business on shaky foundations if you're running it that way. The customer service thing really starts to get you down. If you're running a low ticket dropshipping business from China using the model that everyone talks about, running a Shopify store with products from AliExpress or Temu or whatever, and in the morning, if you dread opening your laptop because you know that in the inbox is going to be full of complaints and refund requests and all those issues, and you can't refund you can't have the customers return products because they're not going to take them back to China, or they're on a boat halfway across the ocean coming to the UK. It just means you're always putting out fires every day. So I think those were the most problematic times. The moment that it shifted and actually became a lot smoother sailing was the moment that I realized there's a better approach to this. And when I adapted the model from America, but I now refer to as the home turf advantage model, which is the model that I teach inside Dropship Unlocked, which focuses on premium UK suppliers selling products that can be delivered the very next day, or certainly in 1 to 2 working days, because the suppliers are in the same country as the customers, so that nothing has to cross borders. It's really quick delivery. And it means that you, as the retailer, accept the money from the customer first, the retail price, and then you just go and buy it at trade price from your supplier who you have contracts and agreements with. And those suppliers don't sell directly to the public themselves. So the common question is, why wouldn't a supplier just sell directly? They don't. They use a retailer network, and we are just one of those retailers. I think that made my life and my business run so much smoother. because due to those reasons, you end up getting happier customers and it's far more enjoyable to run as a business. You open up your laptop and you've got like 5 orders and you've made $5,000 because you've got 5 orders for £1,000. That's 5 emails you've got to fulfill, 5 products that will go out and be with the customer tomorrow or the next day. You take the profit from those. And even if one of them goes wrong, that's one thing you've got to deal with. You know, it's so much better than needing hundreds of low ticket orders and thousands of men's tie orders on which you make no profit on any of them. And you've got a disastrous inbox full of complaining customers. It's just not the kind of business I would want to run. I think I'd prefer to have a job.
I can certainly vouch for that. I think the model that is taught more frequently, the traditional dropshipping, is flawed, and I certainly found out that in lots of different ways with the low ticket items and the long delivery times and the headaches. Ultimately, is what it leads to is not wanting to open up your inbox because the model that you're trying to push isn't backed by quality, isn't backed by really high quality products, and there's so many different issues that come with it. So you can make some short money from the short term, but the long money and the real sustainable business comes from a model that you can actually stand behind and believe in for the long term. So that's where your home turf advantage model comes in, which of course I'm a huge fan of because that's how I operate my businesses now after learning from the Dropship Unlocked Masterclass program. But tell us about why you really pushed home the home turf advantage model. How did it actually transform your business?
Yeah, it was a huge transformation. I mean, partnering with UK suppliers, it firstly ensures faster, often next day delivery. Also higher quality products because the supplier or the distributor in the UK has done their quality checks, their quality assurance. The items may not be manufactured in the UK. That's a common misconception about the home turf advantage model. But they have been checked. They're in the UK by the time we're buying them at trade price and having them shipped. So it means nothing has to cross borders. Everything's there. It's in stock. It's ready to go. We don't have to buy anything up front or risk any money because the only time we're paying money to a supplier is when we've already been paid the retail marked up price to the customer, which is what everyone in the public buys the product at. So it was interesting because it was almost too good. I almost didn't believe it when it first came through. As I say, I was reading back through some texts earlier and I was going back through some texts in like 2017. And one of the texts was a screenshot of an order for, I think it was like £700 or something. And I remember looking at it and reading it, like sending a message to my family at the time that said, just watching Netflix and made £270. Like, is this real? Is this a real thing? I almost felt guilty because I was like, well, that's more than I used to earn in a day at my job. But I used to work so much harder for this. But I had to shift my understanding of like the delivery of value because yes, I hadn't worked at that moment for the £270. But I had to remind myself that the night before and the night before that, I'd been sitting in Cafe Nero in London, near to where I lived, until nearly midnight with my laptop, uploading products and preparing my ad campaigns. So I had worked for that £270, but it was front loaded. I'd worked, and then because of that work that was kind of locked in, I was now leveraging that hard work I'd done before to earn a passive income. But it's not really passive because obviously you have done the work for it before. And so it was really interesting. It improved the delivery times because customers were getting items very quickly. The product quality was good, so it led to a higher customer satisfaction, better customer reviews, which then is a nice positive feedback cycle because people see nice reviews and then they go and say, oh, well, I want a product like that as well, so I'm going to buy one. And so because of this, you're finally starting to see the results that Tim Ferriss talks about in the book. And yeah, the business really started to take off rapidly. And shortly after that, my life changed quite a lot. We got married. So it was funny. We were at the wedding and not many people at our wedding knew that I was running this side business in evenings and weekends and was soon going to be moving to Thailand. So we were there, but we were like, we can't really talk about it, but we know what's about to happen. And like, you know, we can't announce it because we hadn't officially quit our jobs yet. And the business was doing really well that it allowed Becky and I to say, okay, I think this is it. This is the week we hand in our notices and we quit our jobs. And that day we handed in our notices. Becky had handed in her notice earlier that day. She was an editor in London. So she handed in hers and kind of texted me saying, it's done. So I was like, okay, I've got to do this. And I remember driving into the office and just looking down at the envelope on the seat next to me and just thinking like, my life's about to change. Is this a mistake? I don't know. And like nothing can really prepare you for that moment where you've been in this stable corporate job with the nice perks and you've got the company car and the laptop. And I'm like, thinking I've got to hand back the keys to the Mercedes and the laptop on the phone, the company, private healthcare, like all the nice, secure things that they keep you in those golden shackles in exchange for autonomy. They control your time, because of it. And so they effectively own you and your time because they're taking the bulk of your day-to-day life and using it to make them a profit. And so it was a really nerve-wracking moment. I walked into my boss's office and I was like, I've got something I need to say. And he just looked at it. And I remember he just kind of looked up and he was like, is there anything we can do to change your mind? And I think he thought I was going to a competitor or I was going to do something, similar related to move industry. And I was like, no, I've started my own business. We're going to move to Thailand. We're going to become digital nomads. We're going to run a business from there. And his face is just like, I've never heard anyone say that before. No one's ever left the company and said that. And it was really nerve-wracking. And it just felt like I was suddenly like in space out on my own. And that evening, I remember Becky said to come and meet her at the park. And we were she was in Holland Park on this bench in London. And she had these 2 cans of M&S G&T. And we just opened them up. And we just sat there and we were like, cheers, thinking that I think we celebrate, but have we just made a massive mistake? I don't know. And we said that night, like, let's go and celebrate. We need to mark the occasion. So we went to a sushi restaurant in London to kind of mark that occasion. And since then, it allowed us to go and travel and live in Thailand, live in Bali, live in Vietnam, move to Dubai for 6 weeks, Mexico for 6 weeks. And it was breaking free of those golden shackles. And it felt good because finally I had the autonomy back. And since that day, I've never looked back and I've been able to go and do whatever we want, whenever we want, without answering to anyone or any company ever again. And I think the reason that feels good for me, and it might be different for you listening, is because I knew that was in alignment with one of my core, deepest values. And as soon as I understood that, I realized I'd made the right decision.
Exactly. I mean, your boss must have thought you were crazy when you came out with that story and that reason, but it's because you'd had time, you'd had months of building a business up, you'd had time spent, I'm sure, going through it all with Becky, making sure that it was the right decision for you and the long-term future that you had. But those initial results that you'd seen with your business clearly gave you that confidence that you were making a calculated decision to move out. And in the end, it became the most common sense if you wanted to live the life that you wanted to live. But again, bravery to make that decision. So people often ask you, I know, is why did you actually then decide to start Dropship Unlocked? Obviously, you built the dropshipping business up. That's given you the freedom. That's given you the control back over your time. And surely you could just continue building and growing a dropshipping business and not have to open up Dropship Unlocked. So what was it that actually made you decide to start Dropship Unlocked, your e-learning business, to teach people and build your community around the model that you were implementing?
Yeah, it's funny that question has come up before. And I think the misconception is that the only reason you would start a new business is just for additional profit, because there are other factors that come into it. And living in Chiang Mai in Thailand was amazing. Like being able to be a digital nomad, be on that scene, go to the meetups. I met lots of amazing, inspiring digital nomads who'd come out there and were at various stages of their business. But some of them had not even started yet. And I was there making a good, stable income, having, had a nice e-commerce business. And I remember I spoke at a few of these events and meetups, and I kind of got in with the network there and would do these weekly meetups. And I came in and spoke at a few of them. And I remember meeting 2 specific friends out there. One who was teaching so he had an online coaching business, teaching people how to learn different languages. And that was quite interesting to me. And another one who taught people how to earn money with blogs. So like creating online blogs and then monetizing them. And they both said to me one evening at dinner, that the way that you've adapted this model that you have to work in the UK, you should consider teaching it to others. Because think of the other people who are like you, where you were a few years ago, that would add a huge amount of value to the market. And it hadn't really been on my radar until that point. But suddenly you're speaking to 2 people who run coaching businesses like this and say how fulfilling and rewarding it is. And I just thought about that. And I realized that, like I said before, the reason I left the job was because my values and like my autonomy desire was not being met. Well, I realized that this kind of business, Dropship Unlocked, ticked another box for me that now I realized was missing. And that's once you replace your income, sometimes you start to feel a little bit unfulfilled in terms of purpose. You feel like there's a need for something more fulfillment, because, people dream of like retiring early, But the reality is, if you literally retire like at 30, you're probably going to be very bored for 30, 40, 50 years of your life, unless you have something else to fill that gap. And if it can be something that fulfills you and lights you up, like helping other people achieve the same kind of freedom that you were able to achieve, that's really exciting. And of course, if it can also be a profitable business as well, that's even more exciting as well. So I wanted to pay it forward. I wanted to share what I'd learned. And I kind of felt like it was a duty to help other people who were in the position I was in, like the former me. If I could help the former me from a few years earlier take that first step on the first rung of the entrepreneurial ladder and avoid the disasters that I went through that nearly wiped me out at the beginning, that would be an amazing feeling. And so I remember the day sitting in the apartment in Chiang Mai, looking out over the mountains and talking to Becky. And I said, I think I'm going to start a business teaching other people how to do this. And that's where Dropship Unlocked was born. And I worked with a small group of people initially, just over Zoom. We had a very informal setup. It was like Zoom calls and then a Facebook group. And over time, I realized they're asking the same questions here. And like I'm helping them with the same things. I wonder if I could start to piece together a program out of this. And so I built my own program. And I figured out all of the points where everyone was getting stuck, and I just refined it until eventually it was working like clockwork. And now I've built out a team. We've got an incredible team at Dropship Unlocked. We've built an amazing culture. We have meetups with our members in person. We've helped thousands of people go through our program and get started with e-commerce. And Dropship Unlocked has grown into the UK's best reviewed e-commerce education company now. And my mission is to empower as many people as possible to build their own freedom businesses. So I'm now at a different chapter in my life. I'm now based back in the UK for now, at least for the time being. We'll see how that goes. And I have a family with 2 children now. And, I now am the kind of dad that I envisaged myself being years ago. And I thought one day I'll be that dad that has freedom over his time. And now I do. And that's why this e-commerce business model is so great, because it provides an option for people wanting to replace their job income with an online income.
Yeah, no, it's so inspiring to hear your journey, Lewis. And no, I completely get it, why you'd build another business, even though you'd satisfied your initial needs. So it's that Maslow's hierarchy of needs conversation where you looked after yourself, you've got a roof over your head, you've satisfied that feeling of control and autonomy, but you had that craving of really giving back what you'd learned and helping other people out because you'd been through that transformation. And we both know that so many people also resonate. I know I certainly did when I came across you, Lewis, with that feeling of wanting that freedom, wanting that control over our lives. So thankfully you did turn to opening Dropship Unlocked, as well as, otherwise you could have just disappeared into the distance, into the hills of Chiang Mai in northern Thailand and never heard of it from you again. But thankfully you decided to share what you'd learned so that people in the UK could also implement the high-ticket dropshipping business model that you teach. So yeah, I'm very, very thankful for that. Also, so inspiring to see what Dropship Unlocked has become. I mean, the community that we've built now is like an incredible place to be. People are in there every day, actively online. And then when we do the in-person meets, we've just built just a great culture of people that are all building businesses that allows them freedom. So for people that are considering pursuing freedom, really wanting to learn from your story, what advice would you give to somebody listening right now about how they can pursue their own entrepreneurial journey?
Well, success doesn't happen overnight. All the mistakes and the failures that we talked about in today's episode that I came up against, they're just distant memories now. But I'm always learning. I'm still making mistakes to this day. And you just have to embrace it as part of business and part of entrepreneurship. I think you have to see this as a marathon, not a sprint. It's not going to be this smooth sailing thing right from the start. Now, if you can work with people to avoid as many of those pitfalls as possible and make it as smooth a journey as you can, that's definitely going to work to your advantage. But don't expect it to be a really easy, straightforward route. There will be zigzags in the road. Always try and keep learning and adapting. The journey is going to be full of lessons that will help you grow. And things evolve and change in this industry. This e-commerce industry is always moving. And so it's why inside our Dropship Unlocked program, we're constantly updating the content. We've got to keep it sharp. We've got to keep it relevant. And we want to be at the forefront of what's working today. And so that's why we do what we do. And finally, I think the other thing is just don't wait for the perfect moment to start. Start now, adjust along the way. And if you feel like me, like you'd like full autonomy and control over your own time and your life, then just take that first step on the path to freedom and you won't regret it.
It all begins with that first step and getting advice from somebody as well, like the advice that you got from your nan, and putting that into action until you succeed. I always love hearing about your story, Lewis. It's more inspiring actually to hear about the difficulties and to be able to resonate with you as just a normal person that went off to start their own business. And now you've gone on to do obviously over £5 million in sales with your e-commerce business. So it's incredibly inspiring. It shows that there's always going to be a bumpy road, which is inspiring for anyone to hear that hasn't had a smooth path already. It's good to know that that's not what you should expect anyway. So I guess for somebody that wants to learn more from you about the UK system that you've implemented and created, where would you recommend that people actually go and start?
Yeah, well, I hope it does. I hope that the journey that I've shared today does inspire you to take control of your life and build your dream business. If that's what you want, then let's get you on the road to success and get you doing it. I hope you found this discussion valuable today. And if you are ready to start implementing some strategies to build your own business, to take control of your autonomy and your income, remember, you can learn how all of this stuff works and connect with us inside our community. All you have to do is visit htabook.com.
Enjoying the podcast? We'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment or a review, and we might just feature it on an upcoming episode. Also, for detailed show notes and resources, head to dropshipunlocked.com/podcast.
If you found value from any episode of this podcast, please take just 10 seconds to leave us a quick 5-star review on your podcast app of choice. It helps us more than you could imagine, and who knows, you might just hear your comments on the show. Thanks for being part of our community. Your support helps us keep delivering a new episode every week.
Now, let's answer a question that we've had in from a listener. So remember, if you want your question answered on the podcast, all you need to do is drop a comment beneath the YouTube video version of this episode, and it might get read out and answered by Lewis or I on an upcoming episode. So that's exactly what John R. 1982 has done. So thank you for your question, John. He has asked, how will I know if this dropshipping model will work for me as well, like it is working for others?
Thanks for your question, John. So it's interesting because it kind of comes back to the topic we've discussed today. And it's because I've seen all of the points that people get stuck through coaching thousands of people to do this, that I've created a path that answers all the questions that you'll have as you go along the journey, because there's very rarely a question that hasn't been encountered by someone before and been overcome by our community. So just remember, many have succeeded with our home turf advantage model, from complete beginners who've got no experience in e-commerce through to seasoned entrepreneurs who've tried lots of different business models and run successful businesses in the past. Our community has people from various different backgrounds, all achieving success. We've got people like Suraj in our community, one of our members who generated £12,000 in his first 2 months. And then members like Phil, who generated £160,000 in his first 4 months. And then there's Julia, another one of our members, who generated just under £20,000 in her first couple of months of running ads. So it's because we have a step-by-step program that provides clear instructions and support at every single stage. If you just follow our proven roadmap, the idea is that it minimizes your trial and error. You're not asking questions along the way because they're already being preempted and answered, because we know the thousands of people who've asked them before, and we've updated and adapted the training to kind of tick the boxes for you before you even encounter those questions. You've also got access to twice weekly coaching calls and an incredible supportive community. We have live meetups with our members in person. We've got one coming up soon. And those really bring the relationships to life and the supportive community that you can remain around for many, many years to come at Dropship Unlocked. Now, we teach thorough market research as well. So if you're thinking, well, would it work for me because I might not be able to pick a niche or find products to sell? We have a 9-point data validation system, like niche selection criteria, that you run your ideas through. And we show you how to generate like infinite source of ideas in week 2, so that by the time you pick the products that you're going to sell, you know that there's enough demand there. You know that there's adequate suppliers that are willing to dropship in that niche. You know that it's stable all year round. You know that the products are not going to be problematic. Like, there are all these things that we look at ahead of time so that you can make informed decisions based on solid data. So hopefully that instills some confidence in you, John. You're not going to be the first person to go through this with lots of questions. Those questions will be answered along the way for you at the right time. We don't want to overwhelm you. And so, yeah, thank you for your question, John. If you want to learn more about how Dropship Unlocked can help you and your individual situation, then apply at dropshipunlocked.com/apply.
Fantastic. Yeah, great question, John. I think it's easy to fall into that mindset or having those doubts about whether it would work for you, because you can see it's working for hundreds of other people, but it's like you feel like you might be different and it might not work for you. But the way I like to think of it is if you can see that somebody else has succeeded, then that is proof that they can make it work, and it's proof that you can make it work as well. Why is it that if somebody can do it, why can't you do it as well? Okay, so thank you for that question, John, and your answer, Lewis. We're now going to highlight a recent review that we've had in for the podcast as well. So a very big thank you to Silver Swing Golfer for sharing your thoughts in an Apple podcast review. So they said, thank you for the inspiration to get started to launch a dropshipping business.
Thank you so much for your review, Silver Swing Golfer. Love the name as well. We're really glad to hear that you've been enjoying the podcast. Before we end this episode, can we ask just a small favor of you? Leaving a review for our podcast helps us a lot, and it takes you just a few seconds to do. Your support keeps us motivated to bring you the best content. We'd love to hear what you think and share your review in our upcoming episodes.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Dropship Unlocked podcast. We hope you're walking away with insights and inspiration.
To kickstart your e-commerce journey, grab a copy of my book, The Home Turf Advantage, at htabook.com. It's a distilled guide based on real experience to help you build your e-commerce venture.
Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more strategies and success stories. And if you like what you heard, a 5-star review would mean the world to us, and you might just get a shout out on an upcoming episode.
And finally, thank you for deciding to spend your time with us today. We can't wait to bring you more insights on the next episode of the Dropship Unlocked podcast.